Atau kamu cek lagi, mbok lihat. Oh, kalau memang ada yang masih tipis ya dibenerin lagi gitu, we. Jadi memang harus telaten kalau bikin garis. Seharusnya kalau kamu sudah dapat karyanya itu ada nih kayak gini, beberapa karyanya si beliau.
In 1982, at the age of just 22 years old, Jean Michel Basquiat would produce this painting, a powerful and dazzling image that mixes text, colour, symbolism and mark-making in a raw and uncensored explosion. In a single painting, he would use his instinctive powers of visual language to say everything he wanted to say, about America, about art, and about being black in both worlds. Basquiat's meteoric rise in the early 80s sent shockwaves through downtown Manhattan. In the New York art scene at the time, he stood out, not only as a black man in the whitewashed world of art, but also as an artist who brought attention to its ethnic imbalance. And he would become one of the few black painters to break through into international consciousness.
Black people are never really portrayed realistically, not even portrayed in modern art enough.
Basquiat would show the faces and name the names of countless millions of people that had been disregarded by art history. He would shake the art world with paintings that depict the black experience. Paintings that would be placed in museums that were designed for a whole different audience. 1982 was Basquiat's year. He was a rising star at the height of his powers, and this would be his most mythical and sought-after painting. A painting that after its initial sale was not seen in public for over 30 years. In fact, only a tiny photo of it survived, as proof it ever existed. When Jean Michel Basquiat was in New York in 1978, it was a low-rent, high-crime, bankrupt city. Downtown Manhattan was a grubby mecca for the artist, the musician and the filmmaker. Everyone was creative and everyone was going to make it big. People assume that Basquiat was an uneducated, uncultured graffiti artist from the ghettos with an almost supernatural talent. It was partly a deliberate myth he constructed himself, and partly people's expectations of what a scruffy, dreadlocked black artist could be. But he wasn't the noble savage the press liked to portray him as. On the contrary, he was an intensely ambitious, middle-class young man who knew his art history. Basquiat's career started with text. Under the pseudonym Samo, Basquiat and Diaz began spray painting on buildings in the Lower East Side. But while graffiti was about tagging, marking out territory, Samo wrote more than just a name. If this was graffiti at all, it was something quite different. They were poets and provocateurs, writing cryptic messages on walls next to art galleries.
Mr. Samo and his associate.
But for Basquiat, it was just a means to an end. He wanted to become rich and famous, and Samo was a way to get noticed by the press and the public. In 1980, at the height of their fame, he called it quits and went solo. He never considered Samo to be graffiti. To him they were statements and poems. Yet even when he was hugely successful, Basquiat would be described as a graffiti artist or an ex-graffiti artist, a term that he thought tied his work with the uneducated and unsophisticated, a term he found simplistic and racist. He moved into the East Village with Alexis Adler. Because he had no money for canvases, he would paint on the floors, walls, doors and furniture. Then he would make postcards, which he sold for $1 on the streets. It was while selling postcards in Soho that Basquiat spotted Andy Warhol at a restaurant. He was a big fan of Warhol's and was thrilled when he sold him a postcard titled "Stupid Games, Bad Ideas." It features the noughts and crosses he will incorporate into Untitled. Warhol was intrigued by this paint-splattered street kid, and a couple of years later would initiate a collaboration and hook onto Basquiat's rising star.
Semoga motoronnya.
Basquiat would look at how early rappers at the time used samples, and he would apply that to his artwork. In the same way musicians borrowed from James Brown, he borrowed from Rauschenberg, Picasso, African art, and referenced his own Haitian and Puerto Rican heritage. He would paint several canvases at once, have dozens of reference books around him, have music on full blast and the TV on at the same time. His reference points were many and eclectic: anatomy, poetry, jazz, trash TV, typography and art history. They enabled him to create visual collages which were profoundly original and at the same time rooted in a rich linguistic history. He would fuse words and text together instinctively, like a musician. But it was colour that held his works together. Basquiat was a master colourist and would use oil stick with spray paint, crayons and acrylics, undiluted primary colours layered in rapid succession. And he would build his figures up by reinforcing and overdrawing every line and form.
Is there any anger in you? Any anger in your work?
Of course there is. Yeah, of course there is.
Talk about that. Tell me what the anger is. What are you angry about?
Unable to deal with the demands that fame brought him, in 1988, at the age of just 27, Jean Michel Basquiat, the most successful black artist in history, died from a heroin overdose. His meteoric rise and often controversial career had lasted for just 7 years. Basquiat was an artist who was as dedicated to his craft and just as aware of his legacy as Michelangelo or Picasso. Like all of the artists I've looked at in this Great Art Explained series, Jean Michel Basquiat was driven, ambitious and worked extremely hard. When Madonna lived with him, she said she would wake up at 4 AM and would find him still painting. He had a desperate need to create, and in his short career he would produce over 2,000 works of art. But he would never compromise to reach his goal, never dilute the message. His raw and brutal works draw on the problems faced by African Americans in the US. They are as relevant now as they were 40 years ago. Yet despite his importance, there are almost no works by him in public collections. Not a single one in the UK, and very few internationally. Untitled had been in the same private collection since it was bought in 1984 for $19,000. When it came up for auction in 2017, it reached the highest price ever paid for a work, not just by a black artist, but by any American artist, including Andy Warhol. $110 million.
Thank you, Yuki. Congratulations. Thank you very much.
His art is inextricably linked to his life, his charisma and drive, his race, his talent, and his untimely ending. His works live on as a testament to his talent for placing the immediacy of the everyday into his art. Jean Michel Basquiat's career was brief and spectacular, but continues to cast a long shadow over the art world.
Teman-teman, selesai sudah akhirnya. Ini video yang kedua ya, berarti ya. Video yang kedua. Terima kasih teman-teman yang sudah nonton, yang sudah ngikutin dari video yang pertama sampai yang hari ini, yang terakhir. Ini saya pembuatan kurang lebih ya 5 jam, 5 atau 6? 6 lebih. 6. Oh, 6 jam lebih. Nah, ini dikasih wedak adem dulu. 7. Enggak, udah adem. Ini tinta ketretan tinta. Karena tadi habis improve gitu. Terus ternyata gagal improve-nya. Jadi kayak dikasih parem kocok gitu. Sakit nggak rasanya, Mas?
Sakit.
Sakitnya gimana?
Kayak dosa sakitnya.
Ya, oh ya, tadi kan di awal video yang pertama kan saya mau menjelaskan tentang mencontohkan tentang line dan lain-lain. Ternyata pas saya gambar, pas waktu saya gambar saya terlalu serius, jadi saya malas menerangkan. Ya nantilah tak bikinin video yang memang khusus tutorialnya, biar khusus aja gitu loh, jadi enggak dibareng-barengin. Tadi pas bikin ini terlalu fokus aku, jadi malas ngomong. Ya wes gitu aja teman-teman. Terima kasih yang sudah nonton, terima kasih yang sudah like, subscribe, komen, share. Terima kasih. Sampai ketemu lagi di video selanjutnya. Ketemu lagi nanti dengan saya seniman dari Pleburan Studio. Dadah saya.